We are recording, so keep it PG. Only announcement I have to make is that there's still a chance for you to make a nomination to the open board position that we have. So if you're interested in nominating someone, send that person's name to Brooke Widmer, I'm sorry. And that's all I have. Anybody else got anything they want to bring up? Okay, as CEO of Birdman Productions, Tim Barksdale has been pursuing birds with a camera since 1991 and has made more than 700 analog and digital media tapes of North, Central, and South American birds. That collection forms the core of the Macaulay Library at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Tim is filled from Tierra del Fuego at the southern tip of South America to Resolute Bay in the high Arctic, Canadian Arctic. He's dedicated not to just making beautiful pictures, but to telling stories that compel us to act on behalf of our global ecosystems and the wildlife they support. Tim was principal wildlife cameraman for Animal Planet from 1994 to 2000. He earned a bachelor's degree from Wildlife Ecology and Conservation at Northwest Missouri State University, and later studied wildlife ecology and ornithology at the University of Missouri of Columbia. He currently has production bases in Choteau, Montana, and Mocaine, Missouri. He's also a former adult education bird class teacher, which several of us took his class back in the mid-1990s. And we're glad that Tim is joining us this evening. So let's give a round of applause for Tim. And if everybody will put their computers on mute. Okay, Tim.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. As many of you know, I moved to Montana back in 1999. So I have been back here for about kind of off and on for 2 years. And therefore, I've been gone for about 20 years. So it's wonderful actually to be back. And I'm going to kick right into a shared screen mode where I'm going to begin to share the screen of a talk that I put together for you. And we're going to look at both videos and some of the slides that I've got together for tonight. So here we go. So I'm calling this talk tonight, A Brief History of the Unexpected, because so much of what we do in our lives really is totally out of the blue. At least in my life, it has been an awful lot. And I think the thing that it comes down to after all the years that I've been birding, that I think we need to start to look at what we're trying to accomplish as birders. Who are we as not only a group, but as individuals? And where is it that we as conservationists, because birding, even Birding Magazine this last month, which just came, was about conservation. And so this is something which ABA has not been participating in an awful lot for many, many years. So what kind of world do we want to leave behind? Many of us are now approaching an age where we're not as young as we used to be, right? And so how is it also best for us to reach out to others? And how much time do we really have before we start to make major changes in the world? Because as we know, we've been hearing that climate change is very much like a big ocean-going vessel, like the Queen Mary, and it takes a very long time to slow this down. Missouri is obviously not the drama queen state. We do not have mountains of 10,000, 12,000 feet, but we have incredibly lush and incredibly beautiful many areas of our state, especially in the Ozarks. The Boot Heel has always surprised me is how incredibly beautiful the Boot Heel is too. The Prairie country, of course, is simply extraordinary as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about prairies coming up, of course. So I grew up birding a long time ago, and I do mean a long time ago. And I know you look at this, this amazingly young face and you go, oh, pshaw. But, when the first field guides, when I was coming out, were completely different than they are now. The illustrations were really different. And, we made actual field notes too. We wrote things down with graphite pencils, and ink just was not going to cut it because it ran when it got wet. And then when we got to high school, we graduated, we went up another couple notches, and field guides really, they weren't very portable, but we did what we did, and we did what we had to do back in the day. There were amazing binoculars. There were that we have now. The binoculars we started with were not that way at all, were they? I remember I had a 2-power pair of binoculars when I was a young kid. By the time I was 8, I was pretty well hooked, and I was involved with falconry early on, especially. That was one of my main interests as a young person. I was really fascinated with the speed of the falcons. I was inspired very much by a lot of the writings of Peter Matheson and by my teacher, Edward Shalif, who wrote the Mexican Field Guide with Roger Troy Peterson. And I think those items carried through in a lot of ways. When we would go away for the summer, we would often go to the East Coast up to Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard was kind of a dump back in those days. It really wasn't any kind of fashionable retreat whatsoever. And so things were different, but I had a wonderful mentor in Edward L. Shalif. He was absolutely fabulous. Eddie was caring, and he encouraged myself and another friend, Peter Heilbronner, and we became the Demon Birders one summer. We saw more species in a week than he had seen in the entire month. So we had a lot of fun, and we accomplished a lot. I moved to Columbia in 1979 after getting my degree at Northwest. We lived over on Elliott Drive near Stevens Lake. And I'd gotten young, so I already had kids when I went to work for the Department of Conservation. They were paying a whopping $5.25 an hour. And I had been a restaurant chef and been making $15, $20 an hour in various places. So I was barely able to raise my family. And even though I had a lot of demand to be working on various projects, I worked on prairie surveys with Robert Brundage, for instance. I was on the first lead shot, steel shot team at Shell Osage. So we did a lot of studies on the difference between how the lead shot would penetrate the birds. We fluoroscoped many of the individual birds that we got back to find the exact tracks of the kills and all the things like that. I'd worked on Massasauga rattlesnakes at Squaw Creek. And that was just before I came down here and worked for Bill Crawford over at the Research Center on College and Stadium Boulevard on that it would be the north east corner where there's, I think, an MU facility now. But in that building, I worked with some real giants. I mean, Charlie and Libby Schwartz are still there, Leroy Korshigan, Glenn Chambers, of course, Ken Sadler, Jack Stanford, another overlooked incredible biologist, John Lewis, the turkey biologist, Dale Humberg and Ken Babcock. And I mean, you can't talk about a cast of biologists without realizing that these guys were some of the, the literal Hall of Famers of the time. And I was the bird watcher. I was the kid that didn't have the master's or the PhD. And so I was left behind and was really not able to get the top jobs. I applied for 4 different biology positions that opened up, and every one of them were guy who had a PhD came in ahead of me. Imagine that. So, it was one of those things where I had to learn, and I did. And I ended up back in the restaurant business again. In 1975, many of you will know that I was also involved in a big year. I tried to break Ken Kaufman's record that year. And so I traveled all around North America, and I saw 624 species in a beat up old Subaru. And Katie, I don't know how, of course, but she ended up getting pregnant. And so about halfway through that big year, my year was over. And so that was the end of that one. And we had a great time, though. It was wonderful. And I realized during that year that the people that I really valued the most were the experts in their local areas. I loved the individuals that could take you right to a location, identify a specific habitat where a bird was going to be found, and then take you right to that individual. So I really began to admire that enormously. So, instead of trudging the tundra in Alaska, I was trudging the campuses of Washington University. And I also, of course, had a phainopepla that summer in St. Louis. But then as things started changing in my life, this lady, Ms. Pat Jones, really changed my life completely in a moment of a semi-mystical moment, really. It was a moment where she had some insight about what I really should have been doing with my life. I had been working as director of development. I was in banking for 6.5 years after just getting completely fed up with restaurants. And so I was out on her farm doing bird surveys. I had taken the first initial concept for doing a breeding bird atlas to Jim Wilson and basically insisted that he do it. He was a little resistant to that, of course, but we flew to Cornell. I flew to Cornell and worked with Chan Robbins. Jim came up as well for that meeting at the lab. Greg Butcher was up there, and we did a seminar over about a week on breeding bird atlases. Then with Chris Hobbs, Mark Robbins, many other people will remember that I traveled around the state persuading people to develop the first breeding bird atlas in Missouri. So I've been able to accomplish quite a bit, but without Pat, I don't think I would have ever seen myself as a filmmaker. And Pat had some way of having a plan. She knew what she wanted to get accomplished. She, of course, had the wherewithal to help things happen financially. And since that moment in time, I have been, in incredible countries all around the world, worked for everybody under the sun, Geographic, Discovery. I have not worked for the BBC. And I at this point, really don't think that will happen. But we've had some really good years and some wonderful stuff. So this, I think, was the slide that Nancy sent out for the promotion, and that was up on the side of Haleakala. Cornell sent me out there to find and film the po'oli. That is one of the only times when I have completely and utterly failed. I walked up literally to that root that is over my shoulder and sat down on that root and leaned up against that stump. And literally behind that root, just off camera there is where the po'oli popped up. And the camera was a little bit further back that particular day, but it was aimed in the wrong direction still. And I was waiting and just watched hundreds of birds go up the slope, kois, Maui parrotbill was in that group, some wonderful species, incredible species. And the group had moved up the hill, Anianis and Akiapola Au was not on that group. That was over in Hawaii, sorry. But I thought the group was completely done. And so I sat down on the root. The sun was starting to come out. You're at 8,500 feet. So it's actually quite cool up on the side of that mountain. And you're focused, you're intensely focused for 2 hours. This group had been coming by and you're just locked on with those birds. You're not moving, you're not deviating from looking and searching every bird that's moving. But at the end of that 2 hours, you've got to just kind of take a down moment or two. And the sun started peeking through the clouds. And so I sat down on the root of that tree. And guess what? It's when the dang po'oli popped up literally right behind me. And so that is one of the rarest birds I've ever seen and did not film. I was able to go to Kauai later in that month. I filmed every of the remaining endemics in Kauai for the lab, and we got some great stuff. That camera was a digital Betacam. So we were shooting some of the first widescreen imagery in the country and in the world. I was actually one of the first people to buy that camera, a widescreen camera for broadcast. That was the 30-second digital Betacam off the line in Japan. So I've had some amazing fun stuff that I've been able to accomplish. Baffin Island and the Arctic has been one of my very favorite areas to go. I think you can see my cursor. These are the two major inlets that are north and south of Arctic Bay, this little community over here. And the Bordure Peninsula is over here. And the Bordure is where there was a huge nesting colony of ivory gulls. So I was hired by John Vanderpool and John Dunn to go film ivory gulls. I had just left Venezuela, came back, and there was a job waiting for me. So I left, literally flew from the equator to Colombia, and then got on another plane within a week and was in Pond Inlet and then Arctic Bay for as long as it took to get the ivory gull. On our first trip out of the bay, once we finally got out of the bay, there were ivory gulls all over on the ice. We could see them flying for miles. The Inuits that I worked with, the Inupiats, actually that's a subsection of the Inuits up there. And they had brought along some convenient seal meat, rotting seal meat. And so they put that seal meat out on the ice floe. The ice was 4 and 5 feet thick, but breaking up. It took us several days just to get out of the bay. But once we did and put that seal meat out there, ivory gulls literally flew in from all over, everywhere immediately. There were only 5 or 6 at any moment in time, but I got some spectacular footage that is in the large gulls in North America. And gulls have become one of my specialties, of course, after having found the first Thayer's gulls and documented the first Iceland gulls in the St. Louis area. So the next step I went to was the ivory bill fiasco. And after that, I was at a film festival in Missoula, Montana, called the International Wildlife Film Festival. And Sony and Fujinon, Chuck Lee and John Seitzer had asked me to come down and do a presentation at the last minute. So I took my tapes, literally just like this, tapes, raw tapes, put them into a deck and played tapes in order to entertain the crowds and show people what I'd been doing that summer. And so the last person to come up to me at the end of that was a producer from Oregon Public Broadcasting. And I was later brought into the PBS fold, especially because of a series that I developed with a lady in Boston area for the American Public Television. And it was called Adventures with Birdman. And we'll talk about that in another minute too. So I've just, again, been extremely lucky. That's the Arctic Ocean over here. And that's the plains of Kansas after being burned over in the Flint Hills. And so let's take a quick look. I'm gonna probably fumble around with this just for a second. We want to go back here. Hold on. And yeah, because there's supposed to be a.
Hey Jim, it's Judy Barlow at American Public Television. Hope you're well. Calling on Wednesday, and just wanted to let you know I screened the new pilot episode for Adventures with Birdman, and it's fantastic. Love it. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit.
So that's good enough on that one. Let's go listen to a few minutes of Adventures with Birdman and see if I can figure out how to get out of this program and get into the next one. There we go. I think you're still seeing my screen. So here we go. We're going to boot this up and perfect. People call me Birdman. Kids started it. We're back. Ever since I first heard the names Things like king eider, vermilion flycatcher, blue and yellow macaw, snowy owl, sand, and white magenta. I got hooked in my head, in my heart. Birding can be very hold on. People who have been birding all their lives. When I was
Sorry
younger,
about
it was
that.
bad. Now it's worse. Deep in the cloud forests of Ecuador is a bird so hard birders have seen it. It's called the Hokotoco ant pita, and no one has ever filmed it. Solamente una idea, una imaginación que se me vino a la mente para poder hacer. The bird's gonna be down inside the jungle, and we're gonna try to get to come up a little bit higher. So we'll see what we get today. This is gonna be interesting. We arrived in Quito, Ecuador's capital city, a World Heritage Site where 1.5 million people live just 22 miles from the equator. The people we see reflect Ecuador's rich, ancient history. More than half carry the genes of both Spanish colonists and indigenous peoples. As we leave the city, it feels like we're traveling back in time. Ecuador's first inhabitants may have arrived more than 12,000 years ago, and the country was once part of the mighty Inca Empire. Today, some people still speak the ancient language of the Incas. We have a couple of days to make the 295-mile journey south to the only place the Hokotoco ant pita is found, the Tapicholaka Cloud Forest Reserve. On the way, we make a small detour to film at a birding hotspot. This is the volcano Antisana behind us. We're at about 13,000 feet, and I'm exhausted. Every couple steps you take with this gear, you have to catch your breath again. It's funny how you just lose your breath just talking too much. So that's a good place to stop. What seems to me to be a lack of oxygen doesn't affect the Andean condors and variable hawks soaring above this high-altitude grassland called Paramo. Even tiny hummingbirds like this Ecuadorian hill star have adapted to the altitude and to the cold. The Paramo ground tyrant and whole families of birds like the Synclodes are right at home in this open country. We see an abundance of raptors because there's no forest where they can hide. Species that we find near the lake or wet areas include the black-billed shrike tyrant and Andean gull. While the water itself, an unstable location due to the enormous variability of the winds, actually provides safety for those that can build a floating nest like these Indian coops. When wave action becomes too fierce, Father Coot simply brings more hollow reeds to make sure the chicks have a higher platform to keep them dry. So we end our day at Antisana. In the morning, we'll continue our long drive to the extreme southern part of this fantastically diverse country.
Okay, a few more
When
minutes.
the main highway looks like this, it takes a while to get to where you're going.
Tim, I don't think any video is showing for people.
It's not showing?
No.
Along
People are reporting just a dark screen.
We stop
Seriously?
and stop.
Because Jim and I tested this. Okay, huh. That's weird. So this was working though, correct?
I don't know about others, but I could hear what was being said, but there was no video showing.
Really?
Yeah, I had the same thing.
Huh.
Yeah, I did too.
Same
Me
here.
too. It's not showing, Tim.
Okay, that's pretty weird. Jim and I tested this and it worked perfectly. So is the screen now showing Al Reinert and myself and John? Is that correct?
Yes.
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 Okay, huh. Okay, well, we'll try this one more time in a minute and we'll see what happens coming up on that. I apologize. I don't know what happened on that or if we're having a problem with some type of special thing that will not occur. But thank you for letting me know that.
Would it help if everybody stopped their video?
I don't know.
No, that shouldn't affect it.
If you can see the screen right now, I'm in screen sharing mode, and that should be happening no matter what. If you can see the slide with Al, myself, and John Aldrich.
You were in screen. We're all in screen sharing mode. We see the photos, but there is no video.
Okay.
With the sound.
Okay. Well, we'll keep going then. This is after I finished the Ecuador film and realized that I had to produce 12 more for them. I keep again pretty quickly. I just come back from Brazil and spent a bunch of money in Brazil, spent a bunch of money doing gathering species around the world and going to some of the places that I'd always wanted to go to. The process and the theory behind the whole Adventures with Birdman show is that I've traveled most of my life. I've traveled to all these various places. And when I've gone into these places or returned to those places, particularly on an assignment from somebody else, often the habitats change and the things that the birds have become more difficult to find, and there's destruction. There's enormous habitat destruction in many places I've gone back to. I've had to go sometimes hundreds of miles further to find the same species. So that's what happened when I went back to Arctic Bay the next time. The birds were gone. All the ivory gulls, 384 nesting pairs on the Brodeur Peninsula were gone. Every one of them were gone. And so that's been part of the thing that I think interested all of us, because instead of having a silly follow me around show, you had a conservation message that was deeply embedded because of my life experiences. And in fact, I had footage of the birds and of the habitat and the locations from the first times I'd been there. So with Al, I worked on a wonderful film on John James Audubon, and then went into developing this film on greater prairie chickens. So Battle on the Booming Grounds was my next big one, and we're going to test this out next. So let me know again if this doesn't show, because it's supposed to. The greater prairie chicken film is called Battle on the Booming Grounds. I went down to the final person that backed me for the Birdman film, loved what I'd done. And so they wanted to continue working with me. And they ended up giving me the concept of getting this thing started. Pat helped me get this going as well. Gentleman in Wyoming, and a few other individuals. And we started filming greater prairie chickens in 2007, just as the pandemic hit, or excuse me, that was the Great Recession, sorry. And I'm getting my catastrophes mixed up now. But so we started filming them at Dunn Ranch up in Northwest Missouri. There was still a fairly healthy population up there, and there were still less than 500. The department had been reporting 500 birds, but they were actually down to about 125 to 150 birds. So that's the one area in the state that is doing relatively well, because they've got close to 10,000 acres of habitat in a block. And what I've learned through my experiences with prairie chickens is that we need a lot more habitat. And interestingly enough, You can listen to a guy like Bill Gates. You can listen to these guys who are, incredibly wealthy, incredibly technologically oriented, and you will hear only technological solutions coming from them. They do not understand that native prairie grasses have been pumping carbon into the soil for hundreds of thousands of years and are actually very efficient in putting major amounts of tons of carbon per year per acre into the soil. So this is actually one of the things that we promoted in Battle on the Booming Grounds. And let's see if I can get this one started this time. So we'll go out of there. We'll go back into this over here. We'll go over. I assume you can. And yes, we're going to boot this into Kicks. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Can you see color bars?
No.
You can't see color bars.
I'm only seeing the greater prairie chicken photo that you've had up for a while.
Okay, let me try this then. I'm going to quit that.
Now we have color bars.
Now you have color bars. Beautiful.
Well, we did. Now we have you.
Okay, now do we have can you see video?
No, you're not showing their screen anymore. I'm seeing all the people in gallery view.
Okay, hold on. Let me come back up again. Now let's see if we're doing this now. How about now?
Share your screen again, Tim.
How about that?
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's watch. Now are you seeing?
Yay!
Good.
Each year since the world began, there was prairie. It was just there. In the center of the prairie was a bald spot near some rocks. The sun rose from that place, and then prairie chicken too. It grew straight from the black soil. The prairie chicken danced and leaped to show how glad it was to be alive. This was good. The creator whispered to the prairie chicken to do this every year in the spring to wake up the earth. Then the flowers will bloom and the buffalo will come and life will be good. Little drummers of prairie.
Battle on the Booming Grounds, Last Dance of the Prairie Chicken, was made possible by the Edward K. Love Conservation Foundation, supporting the prairies, forests, and wildlife for generations of Missourians.
So this is the broadcast version.
Ms. Hilda P. Jones, Robert B. Berry, and the Wolf Creek Foundation. A complete list of funders is available at aptonline.org.
In 1841, my great-great-grandfather arrived to this prairie from Virginia. At that time, there were over 15 million acres of native grasses in Missouri, with prairie chickens so abundant that today we may never truly understand what existed. Nowhere else on the planet was there as rich a soil as right here on the American prairie. When I was a young biologist, greater prairie chickens were still common, especially in northern Missouri. You would hear about them being here or there on that prairie or another. And then I began to realize that the tone of the other biologists was changing. We weren't going to be able to assume that these birds were just going to be there anymore.
this is not something that we grow up hearing. We grow up hearing about deforestation and why the rainforest being logged out is such a problem, but you don't hear about prairies. I mean, this is our signature landscape. This is our signature habitat. We're losing its signature bird species.
Today, within the core areas of Western Illinois, Eastern Iowa, and Northeastern Missouri, where these great birds were once so incredibly abundant, there is not a single known individual remaining. I have looked out over landscapes like this since I was an infant. Nowhere are they the same.
There's that whole relationship that goes full circle, and prairie chickens are just part of it, and the prairie's part of it, and maybe I'm just part of it. So we got to learn how to find that harmony out there, and where that's at is tough, but I believe that we can do it.
There was a time not too long ago when the spring skies across the plains were filled with millions of geese, ducks, cranes, plovers, and curlews. This remarkable migration, passing over the abundant booming grounds, was legendary. Today, the booming grounds are few and far between, and the skies nearly empty. But all is not lost. Now we have a chance to turn things for the better, and perhaps regain some of the glory found here and throughout our American tallgrass prairie. We are on a booming ground at the edge of the Flint Hills in Kansas, ground zero in the battle for who will rule these prairie lands.
As nature would have it, every year, greater prairie chickens, the males descend on these grounds right here, in this epic fight for the power to control this coveted landscape.
Their reward? Well, in the simplest of terms, it's the right to mate and to procreate. I've watched and filmed this behavior for so many years, all across the tallgrass prairies. And this, I have to tell you, is one of the greatest behavioral displays on the planet. It is thrilling every time I see it. In the battles of the prairie chickens, you start to see these guys in the middle, these dominant males. They're incredibly adept beings. Suddenly they run across a circle, and there's a male that just stepped a millimeter across some line that you and I don't even see. Then he rushes back, and there's another one. And they're up in the air, fighting, twisting, turning, and they're not letting the younger guys in at all. They're doing a major league battle. This is all about kung fu. I mean, it's dinosaur kung fu.
Okay, that's a good spot to stop that, about 8 minutes in. And we're going to go back out to the rest of the keynote presentation. I'm going to kick back into that and try to figure out how, can you hear me? Yeah. You still hear me? Okay, I've got that at least. And now let's go back to here. No, to here, yes. And I think we have to screen share again, correct? Or are you seeing this?
You need to share screen again.
Good. Okay. I think we're getting this down. So we did pretty well with that film. And we won international awards. We were on at least 181 stations. Since I had to pay APT $1,800 to find out exactly how many stations we were on and exactly how many viewers, I don't know that exactly. But from what I do know, we have very close to, oh, hold on, there we go. We had about 18 million viewers. St. Louis, we had 153,000 one night. New York City, we had 700,000 in one night. And KM West Warrensburg, we were the number 4 for the month of February in 2017. So we did pretty well with that. The next film that I'm making right now is about Missouri. And it's the thing that brought me back here and helped me to realize that I really miss being a Missourian. And I hope my energy can help bring some positive influences and changes back here again as well. The sales tax, when you passed that sales tax in 2016, it caught my attention from Montana. I was sitting there in Little Choteau, Montana, watching whatever channel I was watching. And that November election, they announced that Missouri had passed a conservation sales tax. And I was like astonished because Montana has no sales tax and probably never will. What came out of that was the next emphasis to try to begin a new film again. And we're calling this one A Vision of the Wild. It is the story of conservation in Missouri. And we're producing it down here with our LLC, Birdman Adventures. And it really starts off with the founding of St. Louis. I mean, in some respects, Missouri started in St. Genevieve and with the Spanish, but you know, from Hernan de Soto, you could argue when he wandered through here, but the Native Americans had already been here. The Osage, the Missourians, the Iowa had lived here. Later, many tribes were pushed in up until 1803. And in 1803, these characters all of a sudden started to show up, the Lewis and Clark expedition. And this was really a momentous change. How many of you know that they were the first people to report greater prairie chickens for Missouri? And that in fact, on November the 22nd of 1803, in the Boot Heel of Missouri, they sent a hunting party out in the Tawapati Bottoms amidst the gigantic timbers. They took a route which followed an Oxbow Lake. They don't say this, but it was obvious. They had to be working in one of the sand prairies down there in the Boot Heel. At the expiration of this course, saw some heath hens or grouse. They called the birds pinnated grouse. One of my men went on shore and killed one of them, of which we made some soup for my friend Captain Clark, who had been much indisposed since the 16th. Following this bird shall be here more particularly described. So heath hens were what they were familiar with in Virginia. Of course, these were greater prairie chickens, and they were in Mississippi County, Missouri. So you look at these geographical sections and topographical areas which form the basis of our prairies, hardwood forests, pine forests, and the Boot Heel forests, of course. And these areas are really diverse and really amazing. And this is going to be brought out in the film. We go from ancient cedars that are 1,200 years old to the blue springs of the incredible Ozarks. I mean, that spring is so beautiful. It just absolutely screams for a scene. So we wrote a scene that will be in the film, the final film. But one of the most profound things that I've found out in my research was the numbers of pasture pigeons that occurred here. And the Ozarks, of course, with the incredible pine woods where they had pine seeds that were popping out of those little cones. And then you had the mass crop from all the acorns of every kind of species of oak, depending on what year was successfully having an oak mass crop. The pigeons fed on chinkapins as well. So chestnuts, they could ingest a nut as large as a chestnut. And so I hired a artist to begin. This is the preliminary sketch for a scene which was recorded by Daniel McKinley. He had found this in the St. Louis, Missouri Republican, from the September of 1851. And the description of the woods to the west, of the river, the birds flowing over St. Louis. This is what we next went to. The courthouse, of course, was there. The steamboats would have been lined up along the banks, and you would have had an extraordinary moment of when these birds came over by the hundreds of millions and darkened the sky, literally. So this is the best painting that I've ever found of the darkening of the sky. So I wrote up a scene accurately describing and replicating what happened on September the 28th of it. So happens that Henry Shaw was back in Missouri, the founder of the Missouri Botanical Gardens. It so happens that a young man who was 15 years old named Mark Twain was leaving Hannibal and coming down to work on his first steamboats. And these gentlemen, these people would have been seeing flocks like this. So we're going to spend an absolutely insane amount of money to recreate a flock of pasture pigeons that will fly over for 3 minutes of the film. And it will cost us an absolute unbelievable fortune. I've never even thought of an entire film costing that much, but we'll spend in 6 minutes more than anything I've ever spent in the past 15 years of filmmaking. So, but I think the power will be so powerful. The overall effect will be unbelievable, and people will be, I think, blown away. It builds upon Missouri's natural beauty. It builds upon the abundance and then the destruction of what we had. This is a scene that obviously is a little bit posed, but cutting the pines that were 2.5 feet in diameter by the hundreds of thousands in the Ozarks. We've documented this pretty thoroughly now. Of course, this all started to turn around at the Tiger Hotel in Columbia, Missouri, folks, on September the 10th of 1935. There was a group of men there that came in to the banquet to attend the first organizational meeting, the official organization meeting, which they founded the Conservation Federation of Missouri. Certainly one of the most important institutions ever to be founded in our country. Ding Darling, who had already been the head of the sports fisheries and biology for Franklin Roosevelt, was there and made this sketch, which first was passed to Hank Waters Sr., then to Bill Crawford. This hung in Bill's office when I was there, and finally is now in the Jefferson City office of the Conservation Federation of Missouri. This is a historic document, and every Missourian should be really proud of this moment. These gentlemen were not your typical, what you might think of today, tree huggers or normal ecologists. Certainly Aldo Leopold would be considered an ecologist, but these men were business leaders primarily. Edward K. Love, who is on the right in the foreground, was a real estate developer in St. Louis, owned businesses such as banking and insurance companies. Very wealthy individual, a passionate duck hunter. Sidney Stevens is the next one in. And Sid Stevens was a Columbia individual, the same Stevens College family. His family owned printing companies, and he was a passionate goose hunter, particularly up at Swan Lake. The next one in is Ding Darling. This is Ding with the glasses. Ding was a cartoonist, a political cartoonist, very staunch Republican, and had really just disagreed with many things that FDR had implemented during his tenure during the Great Depression. And Ding left his position, but left a recommendation that Ira Gabrielson, who headed the department for the next 25 years or more, and was the most stable influence in the United States Fish and Wildlife Service probably ever. So it was a great moment in time. The next individual is Aldo Leopold. Aldo Leopold was in Missouri an enormous amount. He had a cabin on the Current River. He sent his only, not his only son, but Starker Leopold to work with Rudolph Bennett. And Starker Leopold conducted the first wild turkey, official wild turkey survey, in which they determined that the genetic mixing, which had been caused and promoted by the early departments, the early game and fish departments before MDC was actually formed, was not working. The genetics were not functioning correctly. If you blended any domesticated genes in with those wild birds, it was not functioning. They were dying off. Diseases were too prominent. They were too stupid to survive. And so this was a very interesting study. It happened here in Missouri. The next individual is Bob Brown. And if you're a birder, you know of the Bob Brown area near the Squaw Creek or Los Bluffs up in northwest Missouri. Edward K. Love was really, again, one of the most important individuals probably ever in our state to promote conservation. His entire life, he enjoyed hunting and fishing. And he put his money where his mouth was, like nobody else. Roland Herr is another name that you'll hear and see prominently in the film coming up. Roland was a tennis champion. He was raised in an affluent family in St. Louis. He was in the top 10 singles and in the top 5 Davis Cup doubles. So he was a very excellent tennis player, a great athlete. And in the Roaring 20s, he was a little bit of a dress-up guy, obviously. And then if you can see the final slide to the right, he really mellowed out in his later life and went into duck hunting completely. We're going to talk a lot about him in the film and the role he played, which is little understood. But this is again, from the 1920s. Roland is back here behind my picture bar, so I hope you can see him there. Then we have individuals which, as I've written this film and developed this film, I've come to understand that Missouri has a conservation culture. And by that, I mean, unlike most other states, you have developed a blossoming flower of conservation here. And this is reflected clearly in that 80.1% to 19.9% of that sales tax at 2016. You know, if you think about the voters and who they voted for, who they elected in those parties, they were not voting for sales taxes except for in one area, and that was for conservation. And this is a very important thing. In Montana, again, there will never be a sales tax as far as I would ever predict. But you have gentlemen like Leo Dry who sold a going business, an ongoing business, and began buying up deserted timberland in the Ozarks. He started buying timber in large chunks and then decided not only that, but he was going to buck every rule of forestry and start to change his entire method of how to grow a forest. He started cutting the ratty trees. He started cutting the runts. He started cutting the other things to let the big trees grow. So he was creating, in some respects, a new virgin forest, a new version of a virgin forest. And Leo found ways to make money doing that. And he succeeded enormously. He ended up being the largest landowner. Not only that, they found lead deposits. He put all the lead money, and because of the contract with the distilleries, they retained some of the lead rights and forced him to keep developing those lead rights. And he put that money into things like Greer Springs. He bought Greer Springs for us. He bought the Grand Gulf for us. If you look at the state parks in which he personally touched, Leo Dry was a champion of conservation, and very few people ever have done the sort of things that Leo Dry has done. So this is where I want to try to go back to A Vision of the Wild. I'm going to show you our trailer. We've had a delightful time, I guess you could say, creating this trailer. And I'm going to quit that and go back into my sharing mode. And I think we've got this down now where I can, yeah. Okay, hold on one second. 1, 2, there we go. Okay, here we go. Now I'm going to go back and share screen. Sweet. Sweet. We got it, folks. Okay, so this is about 6.5 minutes long. And after this, I'm done.
We
are blessed to live in a beautiful state. Missouri is beautiful.
Everybody seeing that?
Yes.
We often take for granted the beauty of a place without understanding the story behind that beauty. Today, the state of Missouri, with all of its history and beauty, has one of the best conservation departments in the country. But it wasn't always like that.
You know, there have been attempts almost every legislative session to introduce a bill that would essentially do away with the Conservation Amendment.
All policy begins with personal agenda. We need those wild places for people to go, and we need a system. This system is the envy of the nation. Why would you mess with something that's not broke?
These issues weren't political footballs a decade or two ago.
And it's beyond politics. It has always been beyond politics. It must be beyond politics. The Missouri Conservation Department is a crown jewel of our state.
This notion of conservation is important to all of us. It is an absolutely essential part of how we relate with land.
Being in the woods, I never did see deer. I never see a turkey. I guess I was a sophomore, and I walked out, and there was a doe and 2 fawns. And that was the first deer I'd ever seen in my life, a live deer. I was excited. I ran all the way back to house to tell my grandma. She always called me Jerry Boy. She said, well, Jerry Boy, I know you're very excited. You want to go to school. You want to tell all your little buddies. But she said, you're not. Tell anybody. And I said, why? She said, because their dads, the son of a bitches, will be down here trying to kill them. And she was exactly right about that.
It all started in 1934, the 5th year of the Dust Bowl. There was no rain, only the wind and clouds of earth came as if to bury us all. The heat and drought swept far north. The potholes, the lakes, and all the wet prairie meadows across the northern Great Plains that were supposed to be marshy or full of water were dry. Because Missouri has 2 great rivers, they had water for the ducks during the winter. But when the fall finally arrived, there were only a trickle of adult birds that came south. From the marshes of St. Charles County, Edward K. Love and Roland Herr became frustrated at the lack of waterfowl.
If you waited until things got better somehow, maybe there would be nothing left.
They saw the interference and the corruption of the politicians. Quietly, they organized, surveyed, and planned.
They began to mobilize. They began to become activists.
Nearly 100 hunters, fishermen, and other outdoorsmen came together at the Tiger Hotel in Columbia.
They brought in partners from Kansas City, St. Louis, throughout.
They elected a leader and set a plan in motion. Through radio, meetings, placards, lunches, and newspapers, they spread the word to every corner of the state, and through the people, changed conservation history.
You know, the Dust Bowl essentially blew into D.C. It was the only way that politicians began to pay attention to what was going on in the Midwest.
The reason conservation is relevant today is the same reason it was relevant in the early 1900s. And that is that natural resources are not in. There are lots of demands on natural resources. And if you want to be able to ensure that future generations shall have equal access to natural resources, you better pay attention to conserving them.
These are long-term commitments that we all depend upon. It is an apolitical, science-based conservation agency. And I think it's a very, very slippery slope to go down when politicians want to start undermining and second-guessing what voters have in mind.
Conservation cannot be a short-term project. If you cannot plan 50 years out, there are things you simply cannot do.
So this is our closing credits. We intend to use beauty as a big, heavy hammer.
some other town. All he wanted was to be free, and that's the way it turned out to be. Flow, river, flow. Let your waters wash down. Take me from this road to some other town. Go, river, go, past the shaded tree. Flow, river, flow, flow to the sea. Flow, river, flow, flow to the sea.
Okay, guys. That's about all I got for you tonight.
Okay. Thanks, Tim.
Great work, Tim.
Thank you.
Anybody?
Thank you.
Anybody?
Thank you very much.
I wish we could have seen the first one better. Maybe we can do something when, well, we could do that. Sure, I know we can do it now, actually.
Do it.
Yeah. Let me do the Ecuador film for you a little bit, show you a little bit more of that.
Thank you.
No problem. My pleasure. Okay, here we go. Oops, hold on, nope.
Would people please kill your video? We could see more of the screen if you killed your video.
What does that mean?
Okay, now we can see this, right?
Yes.
People call me Birdman. Kids started it. We're back. Ever since I first heard the names, things like King Eider, Vermilion Flycatcher, Blue and Yellow Macaw, Roseate Spoonbill, Snowy Owl, Crescent Sandpiper, Red Phalarope, and White Magenta. I got hooked in my head, in my heart. Birding can be very addictive. People who have been birding all their lives have never seen these things. When I was younger, it was bad. Now, it's even worse. Deep in the cloud forests of Ecuador is a bird so rare, only a few die-hard birders have seen it. It's called the Hocotoco antpitta, and no one has ever filmed it. Solamente una idea, una imaginación que se me vino a la mente para poder hacer. Inside the jungle, we're going to try to get to come up a little bit higher. See what we get today. It's going to be
See this? Cahokia Mound. Birdman.
We arrive in Quito, Ecuador's capital city, a World Heritage Site where 1.5 million people live just 22 miles from the equator. The people we see reflect Ecuador's rich ancient history. More than half carry the genes of both Spanish colonists and indigenous peoples. As we leave the city, it feels like we're traveling back in time. Ecuador's first inhabitants may have arrived more than 12,000 years ago, and the country was once part of the mighty Inca Empire. Today, some people still speak the ancient language of the Incas. We have a couple of days to make the 295-mile journey south to the only place the Hocotoco antpitta is found, the Tapachulaca Cloud Forest Reserve. On the way, we make a small detour to film at a birding hotspot. This is the volcano Antisana behind us. We're at about 13,000 feet, and I'm exhausted. Every couple steps you take with this gear, you have to catch your breath again. It's funny how you just lose your breath just talking too much. So that's a good place to stop. What seems to me to be a lack of oxygen doesn't affect the Andean condors and variable hawks soaring above this high-altitude grassland called Prairie.
Condor before.
Even tiny hummingbirds like this Ecuadorian hill star have adapted to the altitude and to the cold. The Paramo grand tyrant and whole families of birds like the Synclodes are right at home in this open country.
Oh.
We see an abundance of raptors because there's no forest where they can hide. Species that we find near the lake or wet areas include the black-billed shrike tyrant and Andean gull. While the water itself, an unstable location due to the enormous variability of the winds, actually provides safety for those that can build a floating nest like these Andean coots. When wave action becomes too fierce, Father Coot simply brings more hollow reeds to make sure the chicks have a higher platform to keep them dry. So we end our day at Antisana. In the morning, we'll continue our long drive to the extreme southern part of this fantastically diverse country. When the main highway looks like this, it takes a while to get to where you're going. Along the way, we see lots of birds. We stop and stop, and then really stop. Fortunately, the locals come to our rescue. That's part of the adventure. We arrive at the Tapachulaca Reserve, and I'm eager to begin our search for the Hokotoco antpin. We've got the common patu here right now. This is a nocturnal moth and insect-eating bird. It eats these huge cicadas and moths at night, sitting very quietly. They pretend they're part of a snag. They're so cool. The 25 or so species of hummingbirds that we see have evolved to feed on different flower shapes, something that is evident in their different bill shapes. Oh. The bird's feathers are remarkably durable but lightweight. They spend time each day carefully rearranging the outer layers, applying a thin coating of protective oil, and removing parasites. The first day we filmed was productive and full of exciting new species I've never filmed before. Being surrounded by so many beautiful birds, I'm not concerned that we haven't seen the Hokotoco antpin on our first day.
Heck. But
it's been raining for 3 days. We still haven't found the Hokotoco, and the weather has really dampened our spirits. This gray-breasted mountain toucan and other native birds are adapting to the cloud forest climate. For us, it's hard on the body and the equipment. But we only have 2 more days here, so we must keep searching.
Where is it?
One big advantage, local guide Franco Mendoza.
We'll go up a little bit
Franco
more.
knows the calls of the Hogotoko and has had some success at attracting them. So he calls and calls and calls. At times, it feels like Franco is taking us on every trail the bird has ever been seen on. We always end up back at the same spot. It's raining, it's very chilly, and it's been just like this the whole time. This is just not working. We've got to try something different. I've heard about a gentle farmer named Angel Paz. People say he's tamed ant pittas. It seems like a long shot. Right now, it's the only chance we've got.
So that's where I'm going to cut it off. You're going to have to invite me back to see more of that stuff. So let's see. I think I'm back now. Yeah, here we go. We're back. And so that's all I have. I don't think I'm muted. I think you guys should be able to ask questions and turn on your videos if you want. And we should be able to have a short discussion. At least I hope. That work out okay, Jim?
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions?
Many thanks, Tim.
You bet. You have to find the exciting conclusion later on.
Those cliffhangers.
So, Tim, where will that new film on Missouri conservation be? When and where will it be shown?
It will be. We're planning on doing a world premiere in St. Louis in November 2021, if we can keep on track. I'm just going to tell you, the animation is going to cost $1,800,000 to do the animation. It's insane. But these are with some of the best animation companies in the world, and we will create something that. So let me put this in perspective for a moment, because if you have grandkids or kids that have ever watched a Transformers film or any one of these Hollywood films today, Marvel Comics, they spend $200 million making those films. And so trying to create something that is real, or that was real, to the maximum effect so that people can actually see it and almost feel it in their guts, to me, that's my goal. Because you can't go out your door and experience a pasture pigeon flock anymore. But if I can create something that is that powerful, a moment where people get choked up about it, or their emotions start to flow and they become attached to understanding what's happened, then I'm creating conservationists at a younger age. And that's what we have to start doing. And they're not going to tune into a book. Kids are not reading books the same way that you and I do. They're watching TV, and they're watching their iPads, and they're watching their phones. And we have to reach them there.
So will the film be on PBS sometime?
It will be on PBS. I don't know when, but Nancy, Judy Barlow is ready to do it whenever we get it finished. So I have kind of a carte blanche with PBS, and when I complete films, they'll broadcast them. So it's a matter of getting them. The problem is they don't pay us at all. And so that's a problem, isn't it? I mean, we don't get, I handed them Battle on the Booming Grounds, and they said, thank you. And so that's what we get from PBS nationally. So we have to do it the way that they want us to do it, and we are. That's a challenge I've accepted. Crazy or not.
Thank you.
You bet.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yes. Do you go to Tower Grove Park when you are in St. Louis for filming?
I have. I haven't spent a lot of time in Tower Grove. I've spent a couple mornings there at times, at the Bubbler, of course, and then wandered around carrying, that 80 pounds of gear, 80, 90, 100 pounds, depending on what rig I've got. So right now we've got a new camera. I'll bring it up. This is the Sony F55 with an R7 back. The R7 back shoots 120 frames per second. So this is shooting 4K RAW at 120 frames per second. And that baby is a wonderful piece of equipment, but it's not gotten any lighter. Things have not gotten any easier with what I want to accomplish. Yeah, I've been to Tower Grove, I've been to the dam, I've been to all over the place. And, you know, love working wherever it's easy. If it's easy at a bubbler, I'll take advantage of that if I can, because again, 80 pounds running around with that on a regular basis, it challenges me. You know, I'm not as young as I used to be anymore.
Are you looking for mules? I'd be a mule.
I've used mules before, but you know, I found that when I'm in a situation like that, Brian, it's often just easiest to just pick it up and carry it yourself, because you know, because of my years of birding, and it's just you can understand when you put your binoculars up and you inch another inch to the right, or you move a couple of feet to the right, you start to get that sense of where you need to look through that branch or this branch or something like that, and so it's easier to do it by yourself, unfortunately.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Tim, could you talked about the ivory bill fiasco. Could you give a short summary of that?
Well, yeah, sure. I spent 14 months down there, and my Carol divorced me after the end of that. And that was an expensive lesson. You know, I loved living in Montana. And you know, it worked out okay, but we didn't get the proof that we needed. And I was on the steering committee, because I was one of the people that was in the field all the time. And the group at the lab up in Ithaca decided to go forward in spite of the advice of several of us in the swamp. And I was close to being able to get that bird on film, whatever it was, exactly what it was. And, you know, it was just one of those decisions that they made over my head. And we came, you know, you've seen where it's all gone. We got insufficient evidence, and, you know, the labs recovered well because of eBird particularly. But, you know, that's something that if I was begging for more patience. They brought in that fall before as they started to get impatient, they brought in more and more students and more people. This is still before we went public. They brought in 25 undergraduates and a couple of graduate students, including Dana Ripper. And there were others down there, but I had the best avenues that we knew the bird had been moving on. And I had platforms. I chose platforms daily. I was up 6 feet above the flood stages. So I was up in the trees. I had a bird coming and double knocking more than once, very close to where I was. And in the summertime, when I'd last had that experience, it was just too thick to see through the trees. You could not see through the leaves. That Arkansas swamp was just so dense. And, you know, with my lenses and with my gear, I have nothing but confidence that I could have gotten the bird. So the question came down to being, how much time was I going to be given? And the disturbance when they decided to bring in and saturate the swamp was too much. We didn't see any sign of that bird for almost 6 months after they did that.
I was down there, Tim,
that was the next year, right?
The day that they, in desperation, sent all of the ornithology students, the young ones, coming upriver on a beat, like an Indian tiger safari beat, bang, 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 making all the noise, trying to scare all the birds up to us old people that were sitting at the north end. It was, you know, yeah, we had lots of birds coming straight at us, but if I'd have been a bird, I'd have gone right angles at them.
Right. So they made a lot of mistakes down there, and it was, you know, as a wildlife filmmaker, you learn to be extremely quiet and extremely secretive, and just play the patience game. The game of patience is a hard game, but it is an effective game, and you have to be. So anyway, that's my comments on that.
Well, what made the double knock?
There's only one genus of birds that make double knocks, Danny, and there's the genus Campephalus. And we had the air used that Dana's team in particular put out in the swamp have recorded multiple double knocks. And so my strong sense was that, you know, so one of the things I wrote up in the Bluebird in 2005, or yeah, the summer of 2005, I think it was published in the fall or winter, talked about a bird that came up to me in July. And I had this unique CD that no one else in the world had, and still doesn't, as far as I know. I'd gone into the archives of Arthur Allen and Peter Paul Kellogg, who had actually recorded ivory-billed woodpeckers in the Singer Tract in the 1940s. And so I had access to the materials that no one else had. The one thing that they didn't have that I felt was an important part of the attraction process was a double knock. And so we went and found powerful woodpecker, which is the South American species, same genus, Campephalus. But we recorded the double knocks of the powerful woodpecker. There was also this drum roll, and I don't know how to describe it. It's not described in the literature anywhere, but there is a rolling rapping that a female did apparently at one point in the Singer Tract. And I had that at the very end of my recording that was about 4 minutes long. So I had peaceful Kents. Most of the Kent calls that you hear are rather loud and shrill, as if they're irritated at an individual who's too close to the nest. And so that was what Tanner had been doing. He was set up too close to the nest probably. And the Kent calls that they recorded, the majority of those were while he was close to the nest in the Singer Tract, and the birds were expressing irritation to him. And you can hear that in their tone. But they had other Kent calls that Peter Paul Kellogg had recorded away from the nest, and those were much more soft and less strident, I guess would be the correct term. So I recorded those softer calls, and we used those as the primary attractants on my CD anyway. And as we did that, as I was sitting up there, it was 100 and something degrees in Arkansas that day. I can't remember. It was just, you know, nasty. And of course, you've got all the humidity. You're sitting above rice paddy water. It's just lovely. But so you're up there, and I all of a sudden realized, stupid me, I've got a CD player right there. I've got a CD there in it, and I've never even used it. So I played it one day. I'd been hearing something kind of foraging way off and really hadn't thought much about it, but I played it, and the bird responded with a double knock immediately. And I was just like, so I turned on my camera and began to get ready and watched and listened and watched and listened. I did not play it again. I waited for at least 10 to 15 minutes before I thought about playing it again. Seeing nothing, I played it one more time. The second time I played it, I got a single rap from a right angle to my left. I was facing to the north where the bird had first double knocked, and then a single knock, which is also part of the Campephalus repertoire. And, you know, I had a lot of experiences like that, but basically they left me very frustrated and, you know, within 100% certainty, I cannot say I was 100% certain, but pretty dang close to 90, up in the upper 90s, because no bird, no pileated had ever done that on their own at all. And I'd seen hundreds of pileated. I filmed hundreds of pileated in a day and I just saw so many birds down there. It was crazy. So I became extremely familiar with all the foraging behavior of pileated woodpeckers. And whatever was happening was not a pileated woodpecker. So
it's still there?
Who knows? I mean, however long a bird lives, Denny, we can only hope and you can only guess, but it's completely unknown.
So maybe not a fiasco.
Well, I mean, the good thing is that the Nature Conservancy, Scott Simon and his team went out and immediately started buying an enormous amount of land. And so they started doing the correct things. They started putting the correct types of oaks, swamp white oaks. They started putting in more tupelos. They planted thousands of acres of land in the area and restoring these bottomland rice paddies back to forest. So, my theory is if there are any ivory-bills still left, which I certainly hope there are, that their refugia is a place like, these large tracts along the Nueces in Texas or along some of these other remote, very remote areas where they're able to hide and stay away from humans. And there are areas in South Carolina and Georgia and Florida that could still hold a pair or two. They're certainly not in good shape. They're certainly genetically in a bottleneck. So the only way out of this is to get them to have some successful breeding in multiple locations where the gene pool can start to spread out again. And the hurricanes, though, every hurricane that knocks down any of these oaks is providing wonderful food resources for them. Those beetles will go straight in there, just like the fire beetles do, the pine beetles do in Montana. They will start flying the minute they smell that smoke. And so after a hurricane goes through, these big Tenebrionides and these other large longhorn beetles will fly straight to these areas where these trees have been knocked down and are dying. And they will plant their eggs underneath the bark. So there will be food supplies for these birds. It's just a matter of the birds living in enough abundance to succeed to the point where we can restore the habitat for them. And I think we, as tree-loving human beings that we are inclined to grow a lot of trees. And so this is a great thing. And we're going to restore habitat. Whether there are any individuals that are left to utilize that is the question.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions?
Is it fair to say if you want to go birding, don't use your bird brain?
I would say use your bird brain, use that ancestral reptilian brain as much as you possibly can, because then you'll feel like the birds feel.
Until you get frustrated.
Well, yeah, but you can still put yourself in position to, I think the experiential level is the most important level that you can bring to birding. And through spending time in the field, I think I've always emphasized this, right, Edge? Get out there and go birding, spend time in the field, increase your skills, pay attention, and use your ears and eyes and everything in order to become a better birder. Any kind of awareness that you can bring to that is really important.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up unless anybody has one more question. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Coming up, and maybe we could do this in person when everybody gets vaccinated, and we can look at some of the whole productions and spend one night doing one thing and talking about one topic instead of kind of hitting the swath. Because I think if I hope to play a role in prairie chicken, I'm almost finished with my book. I've got 2 books coming out on greater prairie chickens, both of them targeted at Missouri. One will be a coffee table book, kind of like what Charlie Schwartz did. And the other will be a book that is a specific, here's how we're going to do it and save greater prairie chickens. And we'll also carbon sequester at the same time. So thank you for having me. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys in the field as soon as we can. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Next month, we have Sarah Kendrick on Intro to Bird Watching and Spring Bird Identification. It's a program in conjunction with the Daniel Boone Regional Library. So you'll need to register on their website because they're hosting the webinar. And so if you go to events.dbrl.org, you can put in the date, March 17th, and then it'll take you to a link to register for that program. So
we had the,
it'll also be in the chat.
We had the red-breasted nuthatch today.
Nice.
Good.
Pheasant run.
Oh, good.
Cool. Okay. Well, if nobody has anything
Thank you again.
See you next month.